You're listening to Rooted and Overflowing.
Welcome to the show. Sarah Fox is a passionate mental wellness advocate and host of the Rough Edges podcast. With her personal journey serving as both an inspiration and a testament to the power of faith and resilience, Sarah's insights and experiences will shed light on the importance of mental wellness and the need for culturally sensitive resources. Her deeply rooted faith in God has been a cornerstone in her journey, providing her with strength and hope during challenging times. Join us as we talk about her remarkable story, the power of her faith, and the impactful work she's doing to foster a more supportive and informed community. Sarah, welcome to Rooted and Overflowing.
Thank you so much for having me.
It is an honor to have you on the program today. I'd like to introduce you to Rooted and Overflowing listeners. So please, to open us up today, tell us a little bit about your story and how you arrived to where you are right now.
Ooh, yes. So, my name is Sarah. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, and I grew up in a Christian household and a Christian West Indian household. My mom's from Grenada and my dad's from Aruba. And so in that household, it was a lot of love, but also we were really strict on education and making sure that we had the tools that we needed to learn and grow and build our careers later on. And so in coming to be a mental health advocate, that wasn't something that was on my radar at all, because in my particular household, mental health, while it was important in the abstract, it wasn't really at the forefront of my mind a lot of the times, because I was so focused on the education and trying to get myself built up into a prominent career. So mental health wasn't always my top priority. And so in 2021, I got hospitalized because I experienced a manic episode. And that came about through me having a less need for sleep at night, also talking really rapidly and being pretty incoherent in the things that I was saying. And I also was very just euphoric in those moments. I felt like I was on cloud nine, on the top of the world. And so there was a lot of disconnect between my version of reality and my family's at the time. So I was also experiencing psychosis, which meant that I was hearing and seeing things that weren't necessarily there. And that whole experience made me realize that I needed to do more to take care of my mental health and to really prioritize my mental well-being. So following my hospitalization, I decided that I wanted to share more information about mental health and just how faith can also play a role in that. Because during that time, I was like, God, where are you? What's going on? I didn't really know what was happening in terms of what I was experiencing. And so, long story short, I decided to create the Rough Edges podcast in order to give people mental health education, but also show that faith can play a role in giving us the hope that we need in order to move forward in our healing journey. So that is just the long and the short of my story.
Yes. And what a fascinating journey it is. So this is very personal to you, and to be able to make that transition to dive in and discover how you can become skilled or more knowledgeable. That's fascinating. During the course of you making that transition from it being personal experience into really studying and practicing and becoming knowledgeable, what was that like?
That's a great question. So initially, I really didn't know much about my diagnosis. So for those who don't know, I got diagnosed with bipolar disorder following my hospitalization in January of 2021. And I really didn't know what bipolar disorder entailed, aside from the negative connotations surrounding it. Like people would say, oh, the weather is so bipolar, or if you have like a change of mood or of thought, people are like, oh, stop being so bipolar. So that was my view of it. I saw it as a very negative thing. But the thing about learning more about your mental health diagnosis is that the more information you take in about your diagnosis, the less scary it becomes. And so, in learning more about what bipolar disorder was, what the symptoms were, what the triggers were, that put everything in perspective for me. And I would also attribute like my growth from having it be personal to wanting to learn more about mental health. My faith really did play a role in me wanting to discover more about how this fits into my journey. Because at that point, my walk with God was just like, okay, God, what's going on? I don't know what your plan is. Like, it better be good because it's not looking good right now. And so, in learning how to manage my mental health, I've come to discover God as a very compassionate father who is willing to walk through those dark moments with me. And because I had that revelation, it made me realize that even though I'm going through a rough time right now, and even though I don't know much about this diagnosis and it feels like it came out of nowhere, I knew that God was with me and I knew that he was walking me through these moments. And I also attribute it to my community because in talking with them about what I was going through, and that was also pretty scary, like talking to my family and friends about what I was going through, because they knew I was in the hospital, but they didn't know exactly why. So getting to have those conversations and really share about what this diagnosis was and how it affected me and how I'm willing to manage it going forward, those conversations really sparked my need to share this information with more and more people. Because the more that we learn about mental health, is the better that we can get in terms of managing it. And so that's how it went from a personal experience to me wanting to branch out and educate others about it.
You touched on two areas that I would like to unpack a little bit. The first with your family. If you're able to share, what were some of the barriers? What was it that made it a little difficult to share what you were experiencing with your family?
Yes, that's a great question. So initially, coming from a woman from the Black community, mental health is heavily stigmatized. And it's also something that we don't necessarily get help for. So a lot of the times it's like that stigma of, oh, like, oh, you're going to talk to a therapist. Like, why do you need to talk to a therapist? Are are you crazy, quote unquote? So for me, even when I wanted to do therapy in college, like early on, my parents were a little bit hesitant and wanted to know why I wanted to see a therapist. And so the barrier really came about in terms of like, why do we need to really look into mental health as much? And then another layer of that was the Christianity element to it. So a lot of the times there's like a push and pull between faith and mental health. And a lot of the times you get that pendulum swing where it's like, okay, I'm going to take care of my mental health. I'm going to take medication. I'm going to see a psychiatrist. Or you could go in the other direction where faith is all I need. The Bible is all I need. I could go to church. I don't need to see anybody and it will be fine. So the barrier really came through like me trying to balance those two things. Like, yes, I can take care of my mental health and I could also go to church. I could also read my Bible. Like, it doesn't have to be one or the other. Like, both can work together. So in sharing this with my family, it was also difficult because there was a certain view of me initially where it's like, oh, Sarah does well in school. Sarah has a relatively normal life. Like, why do you need to see a psychiatrist all of a sudden? Explaining to them the importance of prioritizing my mental health was really getting them to understand that every aspect of your life and your health matters. Like, it's not just the physical body that you're taking care of or just the spiritual. Like, your psyche matters, your mental health also matters. So those are some of the barriers to sharing with my family.
So what was it like when your family did come to understand a bit more about what it was that you were experiencing?
So that first started with my mother and sister. And I have to say, I'm so grateful for them because while I was experiencing my manic episode, it was a whole lot of confusion because one, this never really happened. And two, we weren't really thinking about the symptoms of bipolar disorder because, it wasn't something that was at the forefront of our minds all the time. And so after this happened and I came home from the hospital, my mother and my sister went like doing a whole bunch of research on bipolar disorder. My mom had a bunch of books when I came home. She was like, here's all these books that we can read together so we can really understand,
Wow.
yeah, what's going on. I think because they had firsthand experience to what a manic episode looked like and how mental health could be kind of dangerous when you're not really treating it, because they had that experience, that's something that compelled them to want to learn more so that they could help me manage and be able to, go forward without having this happen again. So that was the turning point for them. But for my other family members, the turning point really came when they saw how passionate I was about mental health advocacy. That was something that really piqued their interest because it wasn't something that again, it wasn't at the forefront of my mind. So I wasn't really passionate about mental health education as much as I am now. But hearing the information and me explaining to them what my bipolar diagnosis was all about, why it's important for us to look at symptoms so that way we can be able to help each other notice the signs and when to get help. That was something that really turned them around because not only are they hearing the information, but they're realizing that it is something that is important to look into, especially when you want to make better changes for your mental health. So those are some of the things that kind of help them understand the gravity of the entire situation.
When we layer on the African American experience, you and your family are of the broader African diaspora. So I would like to get your further thoughts on mental health and the African American community and some barriers and some opportunities for us to open up a little bit more when it comes to mental health and mental wellness.
Absolutely. In the Black community, and now I'm speaking from my personal experiences, I can't talk for everybody, but in general, there's a huge stigma towards mental health, especially mental health in the church. Now, the church is an added layer, so I'm going to leave it out for now. But talking about the general barriers in the Black community, there is a stigma as to like having a mental illness making you weak because we have this preconceived notion that we have to be strong all the time. And given everything that we went through in terms of our racial challenges and all the, ethnic barriers that we face, like especially in America, it's it's a challenging thing to want to be vulnerable because you feel like you have to always be on your A game every single time. And so that one barrier in terms of like seeing mental illness as weakness is more so because we have this stigma that we have to be strong all the time. So I would say that's one barrier. Another barrier is a general mistrust of the medical system, especially when it comes to psychiatry. And I would say, especially in me, like starting therapy for the first time, I was a little bit skeptical because I was like, I don't want people to psychoanalyze me. I've just been feeling pretty depressed. I want you to tell me how to get out of it, and then I'll be on my way. But there's a lot of layers to psychoanalysis that a lot of people don't really know. So on the outside looking in, having a psychiatrist is reserved for quote unquote crazy people. So in the Black community, if you hear somebody seeing a psychiatrist, they're like, oh, what happened to them? Like, what's going on with them? Are they okay? Like, so it's like a whole general like mistrust of the medical system. And especially with the racial aspects of that as well, there's not a lot of cultural competence in psychiatry. Yeah, we may have gotten a little bit better, but when you're a Black person, you need to have somebody that's culturally competent, somebody who will understand your history, your background, your experiences as a Black person, especially like in America, for example. Like you have to understand the systemic racism that goes on. So there are a lot of things that a therapist or a psychiatrist needs to know about you in order for them to treat you properly. So that's another area that could be better in psychology. It's more of like the cultural competence aspect of it. And now I'm going to go into the church a little bit because that is like a whole thing in itself. But I would say the main like barriers in the church is more of like faith can cure anything. And mind you, faith is great. Like having faith gives us hope, and it's like having faith in Jesus is important for everyday life. But the same way that you would see a doctor if you're dealing with the flu, or the same way that you would take Tylenol or any like ibuprofen for a headache, you can also see a mental health professional. And I think the lines get blurred because we think, oh, if I have to take antidepressants, I'm not believing that the joy of the Lord is my strength. And so there's the disconnect between what do I believe biblically versus what do I need to do on a psychological level. And so I think because there's often a disconnect, that's where the biggest barriers come from in the church. And faith is also seen as the bedrock of a lot of hope for the Black community. And so since the church is like full of hope and like the foundation of a lot of people who grew up in the Black community, they would ultimately see it somewhat as a betrayal if you're like, oh, I prayed, but I'm still sad. I prayed, but I'm still anxious. It's like a tug of war between the spiritual practices and the psychological aspects. So I think finding a balance between the two and not making them mutually exclusive, because they're not mutually exclusive. Like you gotta have Jesus and therapy in order to work together. So yeah, those are a lot of the barriers and opportunities.
I want to touch on sleep. I would love to hear how sleep has helped you along this journey.
Yes. So with bipolar disorder, sleep is essential because when you get into a manic state, the need for sleep decreases dramatically. So, for example, I would like maybe sleep if I was in like my manic state, I would sleep for like maybe 2 hours and then feel like I slept for 6. So yeah, it would be like I don't really feel tired. I don't really feel the need to go to sleep. So when you're trying to maintain stability with bipolar disorder, sleep is essential. Like you need to rest because your brain is like constantly moving. And in order to stop yourself from getting into that extreme mania, you need to make sure that you have that rest. And for me, to be honest with you, I'm a night owl. So I like to stay up. But I also notice like if I don't get enough sleep at night, my mood is like quicker to change. And especially during certain points of the day, like in the morning, I would feel like, all right. But then towards the afternoon, evening, I'm like feeling groggy. I'm feeling irritable. So like having a good night's rest is extremely crucial, especially not only for bipolar disorder, but also like to rest your brain and to make sure that your body is getting the sustenance that it needs at night. And also, the art of resting has been lost, especially in the hustling, bustling type of culture and community. So I would say for those who are just like so eager to put extra pressure on themselves to fulfill all these requirements within the day, I would just say to step back for a minute and allow yourself to breathe and just realize that you're a human being. And if you don't get everything done in the day, it's not the end of the world. And I also think that comes, and speaking as a Black woman, that also comes from the stereotype of us being strong Black women and that we need to shoulder the weight of all everybody else's expectations and then also our own to show up in the world and show that we can do anything that we put our minds to. And yes, we can, but we also have to get back to self-care. And this is something that I spoke about in one of my podcast episodes called Dismantling the Strong Black Woman, because I learned, especially in trying to take off that stereotype of Black women are always strong all the time and they don't need help. Yes, I do. I'm a human being and I do need my community around me, but I also need to take care of myself. And so sometimes we have to just take the cape off and decide that we're going to take a self-care day and really prioritize our needs as women, because we're not meant to bear it all by ourselves. And we're also told to rest. I mean, God modeled that when he created the world. Like, he took a day to rest and gave us the Sabbath. So rest is essential to our healing journeys, and it's something that I also want to work on more to just establish a greater pattern of rest.
I remember when I was in college, I think it's either a Roman or a Greek figure, I'm not sure, but his name is Atlas, and he carries the world. And I remember he's my husband now, as a matter of fact, but at the time we were friends in college, and I was just like, I feel like people think I'm Atlas, like I can just carry everything, like I can just carry the world on my shoulders. But even as a college student, like you said, it's just something that, just that whole thought of being a strong Black woman is either attractive to you or it's put upon you. But either way, it's there. I would like to hear a little bit more about putting your faith into action to walk through circumstances similar to what you walked through. What are some tips that people can implement to apply their faith?
Yes, that's a great question. So for me, my faith was really tested after I got my diagnosis. And I remember it as plain as day. I was sitting in the hospital and a nurse came to me with the packet and she said, "This is what your diagnosis is. We talked to the doctors and everything. If you have any questions or anything, let me know." And so I saw on the top of the packet in big bold letters, bipolar disorder. And my heart shattered because first of all, I didn't even know what bipolar disorder really was, but also I thought I was in there for like more depression because I had been feeling depressed before. So I thought, oh, this is probably depression, but turns out it was a little bit more than that. And so in that moment, I remember just praying to God in tears, saying like, "God, I don't know why this is happening to me, but I know one thing. Please do not leave me alone in this because I don't know what to do. This is very confusing." And so during my time in the hospital, I will say that God has shown up in multiple ways. Like, even if it was through the nurses and the way that they treated me, or like through the doctor giving me more information about what I was going through. And even like when I first got released out of the hospital, I was so scared. I didn't know what my life was going to be like after this. I didn't know how to manage it. And so I was just, a whole lot of things were just running through my mind. And through my community and my mom and my sister and people just really checking in on me, making sure that I was okay, getting multiple phone calls and just having people rally around me, God was in that as well, because we can't walk this life by ourselves. And that is something that I really learned in managing this, because again, I used to think that I could manage a lot of things on my own and I didn't need to reach out. But having this mental condition made me realize that I really needed to lean on others more than I thought I did. So practical tips for how to enact your faith in these times, I would say first off, be honest with God about what you're going through. A lot of the times we think prayer has to be very proper, very eloquent, and we need to just say all of the right things. Sometimes a prayer could be like, "Jesus, help me. I don't know what's going on right now." And once you have that honesty with God, he is able to come through for you and provide for you in ways beyond what you thought he could do. And so I would just say the first step is to be honest with God. The next step is to also cultivate that level of community, or even like talking with somebody that you trust, especially if it's like a church leader or somebody that you really know that is like that you can actually like have that type of conversation with. I would encourage you to really get into your community, because actually having somebody in your corner where you're trying to go through these hard times, they can actually remind you of God's goodness in the times that you think that you can't get through. And I would give you an example of this from my own personal experience. So one of my friends, I was talking to her about just me getting my diagnosis and how I felt about it. And she told me, she was like, Sarah, it's okay. Like, your faith is not indicative of this. Like, you don't lack faith because you're dealing with this. God is still good, and he will still show up in your life, regardless of you having this diagnosis. And when I tell you, that really opened my eyes as to how you can actually find a balance between faith and mental health. You need to realize, and this goes to my next point, you need to realize that your diagnosis does not determine your character, and it does not determine your faith. And that is something that has kept me going for a while, because usually we think when bad things happen, it's because our faith is not strong enough. And I'm here to tell anybody who's listening right now that if you are going through a situation similar or another challenge in your life, just know that God's love for you will not change, even though you're going through these horrible experiences. God is with you, and he is there to show you that there is hope in this situation. So I just want to encourage people that having your faith in these situations comes through reminding yourself that God is good. And if he was able to bring you through another challenging experience, he's able to bring you through the one that you're experiencing now.
Thank you for sharing that. I know that in these days, things are moving so fast. Life is so loud around us. But to be able to cut through and hear and experience God in the midst, that's priceless. So thank you for sharing that encouragement. And thank you for sharing your story. You have a fascinating story. And I love that you were able to see God working through other people, God working through the doctors, working through the nurses and practitioners, because he sure does. I'm glad that you are a witness, and I am a witness to experiencing that as well. So, Sarah, with the work that you do as a case manager, the work that you do as a mental wellness advocate, what are some other things that you do in your spare time?
Yes. So when I'm not podcasting, I love to write, especially poems. And I've also performed some spoken word in the past. I don't do it as much now. I'm trying to get back into doing it, but I love writing poetry. And I also love just writing stories, like fictional stories, and just letting my mind wander through my writing. And then I also love exotic foods. That was like another thing that because I love trying new things. I love trying new food. So if there's a restaurant or just some little mom and pop shop, I guess, anything to discover, especially because I'm from New York. So there's always just some restaurant or some new thing happening or some street market going on. I'm always there.
That's a good pastime for me as well. I do enjoy trying new things and new foods, especially. Do you have any recent favorites?
Ooh. So, okay, I was recently in Houston. So there was this lovely barbecue restaurant.
Ooh.
Yes. So I had like the ribs with like yams and mac and cheese. Oh my gosh. It was so good. Especially the yams. Oh my gosh. I love it. It wasn't in New York, but that's like one of my recent favorites.
Amazing. Sounds amazing. You've got spoken word, you've got your creative outlets, you've got an enjoyment of exotic foods. Tell us a little bit more about the Rough Edges shop.
Yes, so the Rough Edges shop it's an extension of the podcast where my co-founder and I, Marilette Sanchez, we decided to do just like a little shop with like different sets of apparel and journals. So we decided to have not only just things for people to wear, but to also bring the message of faith and mental health in that avenue. So some of the sayings are Jesus wept and so can I. Another one is doing the healing work, different things like that. And we also have like 20% of all the proceeds going to a specific organization called the Christian Mental Health Initiative. And they also do faith and mental health education for different churches across the city. So yeah, it's been pretty good.
You were featured on the Women Who Podcast magazine recently. Congratulations with that. Your podcast has several accolades that really lets us know that the work is reaching people. So congratulations to you on that.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Sarah, it's been a pleasure to have you with us, and there's a seat at Rooted and Overflowing open for you at any time.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Rooted and Overflowing. To hear back episodes and learn more about the podcast, visit rootedandoverflowing.com. Resources are available, and they are designed to equip you and enhance your walk with Jesus Christ. When you rate and review the show, it helps me make sure I'm sharing information that is valuable. So I invite you to let me know how I'm doing and share the podcast with a friend. Until next time, stay rooted in Christ and overflow with gratitude.